going to spend time on that. That would be a whole new study. But those of you who are interested in a good study on that, you can go to one of Roger's books, and he even has a really good drawing of what Daniel would have seen. And even if you look at what's happening today, you can probably make a lot more sense out of even what Daniel would have saw and would have been talking about, because we do see a kingdom that is starting to take over the world, and one day we'll have the power until Yeshua comes back and takes it back to himself. And when he does that, it'll be for eternity. It won't be like it was for Nebuchadnezzar, just for a little while. So anyway, so there we go. So I call this one Covenant Declared to Jacob. And some of you, those of us, I know we see things from 2020 because we've already read the scriptures. But today how I want to look at it as though we are Jacob. I know nobody wants to be Esau, but because they were living life like we do. So even though, and before I go to my next slide, I'll just explain a little bit more. Even though the mother, Rebecca, knew that Elohim had already said things in my way, I can't walk over there, who was going to be the most important as far as he was concerned. And we know that Rebecca is told it will be Jacob over Esau. So the elder will serve the younger. And let me go here. So I know most of you, this would have been last week's parasha, but the reason I'm talking about it is I think it will make sense in this way, because I wasn't here last week, and we didn't talk about it last week. It was the Hayasod. So if we can understand that we see things from our point of view. So Jacob and Esau came out first, Jacob came out fighting, and he did that throughout his life. But they didn't know unless the mother told them. We can surmise one way on that one or another, but regardless, they still wouldn't have understood all of the ramifications of what it meant to be chosen by God and the other one not. So they would have gone through life, living life today, in the here and now. So Jacob comes out, Esau comes out red and hairy, and that's why he's called Esau. Jacob's not. Esau's obviously loved by Isaac more than Jacob, because for whatever reason, Isaac loved the fact that Esau was a hunter. He went out, he found his food, versus Jacob, that it says that he stayed at home. So, what do we make of Elohim establishing the covenant with Jacob? It was already passed on to him through the blessing Isaac, his father, gave him over Esau. Actually, I will go to... come on. I forget how this works. Oh, sorry, there we go. Okay. I'll go to the map. So, right now, Jacob's still at home with his family. And he's listening to his mother. He gets the blessing, but he does it through deception. And unfortunately, we know that this characterized not only him, but the rest of his family, because as you go through the parashas, you see how more and more his family becomes deeply entrenched in trying to deceive people, fact, we even know that Joseph eventually his brothers would want to kill him. But Joseph showed a completely different character. So here we see Jacob deceives, then this deceives here. So and I'll read what I wrote here. It was already passed on to him through the blessing Isaac his father gave him over Esau. So I'm talking about the covenant. So we already have an idea what's already going to happen. Jacob gets his rightful blessing of inheritance through deception. But it's interesting, if you look at Esau, in a lot of ways, he seems to be a better man than Jacob. He seems to be more upright, except for when he is willing to sell his birthright, and then, of course, eventually, through that, the blessing would go to Jacob. So Esau's the honorable man in a lot more ways. Why Jacob, then? Why would he chose the one who seems to be deceiving all the time? It doesn't make sense for God. God, why would you do that? Elohim, why would you choose the one? Why are you almost going against the very character of who you are? And we also know that Esau did actually already have the right to the blessing of the firstborn. So it seems as though Isaac may have not been told, and I say may, because I don't know, but it seems as though Isaac may have not been told by Rebekah, that the blessing had already been given from God to go to Jacob, not Esau. So Jacob eventually would get it, and as we see here, Elohim, we know, already chose the younger Jacob over the older Esau before they were old enough to make their own choices. We can read this in Bereshit 25:23 and Romans 9 verses 10 to 13. So we know that clearly the blessing went to the one chosen. We who are looking at the whole picture already know that it will go to Jacob, not Esau. But remember, they don't know this. And if they did, they lived life as if they didn't. So here and now, did Jacob and Esau know who fights for the... And then the other question is, let me go to the question here. Okay, here we go. So there's the questions. So, as I just said, they maybe had an idea, but still, they're living their life today, not based on the future. So, however, neither Jacob nor Esau knew who would get the blessing and right of inheritance. Like you and I are living as we see in the moment, they were not told by the parents that Jacob would receive it, not Esau. Esau, though, he had the right to it as he was the eldest, and Isaac seemed to have been willing to give it to him. So Jacob from the beginning, as I already talked about that. And so here I'll go to, so part of the story, of course, we see Rebekah hears that Isaac is going to give the blessing to Jacob. So Rebekah already knows kind of the food that Isaac would like. So she tells Jacob, your father's going to give the blessing. Go get me 2 kids of the goat, and I'll prepare them exactly how Isaac likes it. So, of course, he listens to his Ema right away. And although he has a few questions, but then when he gets to his mother, Mom, how am I supposed to show that I'm Esau? So of course, his mother Esau says, here's some of your brother's clothes, the nicest ones, puts them on him, and says, But then Jacob's response is, what if he figures it out? Then I will get cursed rather than blessed. She's like, don't worry about let the curse come on me, not you. So Jacob goes in, takes the soup, listens to his mother. Of course, at first Isaac is a bit questioning, is this really Esau? But smells like him, kind of feels like him. And so he goes ahead, gives the blessing. And to Jacob. So here we see Jacob. The other thing I want to point out here is the fact that Jacob was willing to fight for what he wanted, and through Esau, it's clear that he wasn't willing to give up something to keep that blessing. He's like, and you can't blame him. He thought he was going to die, and if you're going to die, what's a blessing? You're going to give it to the person you think is going to live. But it shows his disdain for it, because if he truly wanted to keep the birthright as well as the blessing, he would have probably fought a little bit harder. So, back to our story, while Esau's out getting game for his father to prepare it, which eventually he finishes, just before that, Jacob leaves with the blessing. Now, if we look at the blessing, you'll notice that the blessing will contain everything that if God would speak to Jacob later. So again, why did God have to do that? So now you know a little bit of the history, so let's go to today. So when receiving the blessing that Elohim had already told Rebekah was meant for Jacob, we know that Jacob received the blessing of the firstborn, which we can read in Bereshit 27, verses 26 to 29 as well. And when Esau returns, there's no blessing left for Esau. Esau's told that he too would live in the richness of the land and from the dew of heaven, but he would constantly be at war with his brother and serve him for a time. Now, he was mostly under his brother's rule until he was able to break it off. And if you look at if you look at the history of the southern kingdom, eventually the Edomites were able to break off from the rule of the brother. So, and as we continue in the chapter here, Esau continued to show his disdain for his parents as he lived in disobedience to them. And one of the ways we see this specifically is because he marries people that his parents didn't want him to. And at the end, just before Jacob finally runs away, the mother says, what's the point of my life if Jacob is going to marry women that I don't want him to marry? Why am I here? So Isaac hears that, tells Jacob, you better get out of here. Plus, the mother was also telling Jacob, you got to get out of here because your brother wants to kill you. So he runs and he goes to Canaan. So, okay, let me go back to some other pictures here. I'll go back to the other one. There we go. So he goes to Canaan from where he's living, and Padan Aram up to, Betu. He goes to Bethel, house of God, which is, it's not. Anyway, it's not. So he goes to the house of God, and but first it was called Luz. So while he's there, he's on his there we go. So while he's there, he needs a place to sleep, so he finds a rock, and it's that rock where he puts his head. He has a dream. there we see the angels ascending and descending. So now if we look at the history of how a vassal and a king, even today, you would have people who would take care of your king, who would help take care of the vassal. And the vassal would be, in this case, would be Israel. So God's sending his people, the angels, to help and to tell him what's going on. And so that's what, just so we can understand a little bit of why God would have sent it in that form. So that way Jacob knew what was going on. But what we can see up there at the top, and I think that's a good thing, is Yeshua would have been at the top of that. Because it says that there's a man standing at the top of the ladder. So they're answering to him. And he is the one who would now give the covenant. And I know if those of you who study a little bit more of the rabbis, they would say that they would make more out of that rock. Like they always want to come up with some sort of midrash to say that one rock fought the other one. So Jacob chose that rock instead of the other one. And so now our narrative, if given to us, if we see it from our immediate standpoint, shows why Elohim had to specifically make the covenant known. It is true that the covenant is going to go to Jacob because of how we see it. The only one who has that kind of knowledge, of course, is God, not Jacob. So while Jacob's having his dream, God tells him that he is going to give the same blessing that was given to him by Isaac. And now Jacob knows clearly that this covenant belongs to him. And so let me read it here quickly. And behold, Yod-Heh-Vaveh stood above it and said, I am Yod-Heh-Vaveh, Elohim of Abraham thy father, and the Elohim of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth. And thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. So now I hope that helps us to see why God had to make it known to him. And let's go on here. So Jacob wakes up and makes a vow. Now, if we look at our previous history, we can tell that that vow that Jacob was making wasn't a vow, if God will keep me, then I will be his. It was more that when God brings him, does what he says, that when he comes back, he will also give him, because Jacob says he will give him a tithe. So we see, and we also see here that this is the first time we hear about a tithe being given. Now, quickly, I'll just mention that we should also notice that it's Jacob who says he will give the tithe. And a lot of Christians especially want to use this as saying, oh, you need to tithe to the church. God didn't say it. Jacob said to God, if you do this, I will tithe. So he was giving it to him out of his heart. Like we would, when we bless somebody, we want to give it to them. The tithe was only instructed when the Levites were put in charge of the tabernacle or the temple eventually. Then, yes, the tithing is required. There's no question. And it's supposed to go to them. And right now, there is no temple or tabernacle. So it's not that what I'm saying here is that when we give our tithe, we should, like, we see it, we should give it out of our hearts, as Jacob gave it to God out of his heart, not out of, if you do this, someone's not going to be able to pay their bills this month or something like that. And we also know that when Jacob would have given the tithe, he would have given it from what he had. And there was no money being used at that time. It was cattle, it was wine, grain, things like that. That's what you would tithe from. So, let me go on here. Okay. I think that's it, hey? So, anyway, and the rest of the story, which just talks about Jacob meeting Rachel, and we know that, as was read, Leah, and it's interesting, there is one culture, I was doing some research on if that was a common practice for the elder to have to marry before the younger, and there's one culture in India that they still have that practice today, where they do expect the elder to marry the younger. Now, in the scriptures, we can't say for sure that that's how they did it, but it's interesting just to note that that excuse came up by Laban after Jacob's, of course, upset because, well, I worked for Rachel, so where's Rachel? Now I'm going to work another 7 years for Rachel. And it's also interesting if we look here at our text. So, in the end, he marries Leah first and then works another 7 years for Rachel. After the wedding night, he sees it as Leah and not Rachel. He is upset, and rightfully so. And now he changes his story to, it is not our custom to have the younger married before the elder. Because previously, he had said to Jacob that I would rather you marry Isaac instead of another man. I'm sorry, I would rather you marry Jacob instead of another man. So, and so in the end here, what we see about God is he allows Jacob to be deceived, and because what goes around, you could say, kind of comes around, because clearly Jacob was deceiving, yet God continues to show his faithfulness to Jacob, and because that's who God is. So in his character, that's what he will do, and that's what he does for us, and that's what he's doing for Israel right now. So.